Hello everyone, I'm Brahmithra, and today I want to talk about organic storytelling and how the game Kingdom Death Monster uses random elements, dice rolling, and card draws, along with a vague setting to tell one of the most compelling organic stories you could possibly ever find within a board game. Now I've played many of different tabletop RPG games. Right, I enjoy Dungeons and Dragons the most. I've played other systems, the basic fantasy settings or basic horror, like Arkham Horror or the White Wolf systems. They try to tell vague horror stories, horror settings like that. Those are the type of games that I enjoy. My one of choice for fantasy setting would be Dungeons and Dragons. But that's the entire thing. A fantasy setting can be applied to many games. I've often talked about Hero Quest, Warhammer, Warhammer Quest, any one of those just fantasy settings. There's even Warhammer Fantasy, the tabletop RPG. There's Lord of the Rings tabletop RPGs. Fantasy setting is a very broad setting, right? There's many components. Dungeons & Dragons has many books that are based within fantasy settings. They're a very common go-to. Originally, even Kingdom Death started off being a Warhammer Quest-like board game, using the fantasy setting. However, Kingdom Death made the choice to get out of that and create their own lore, and how creating their own setting unique to their brand, and how not being tethered to the fantasy setting could actually be a benefit. And it does work out very well for Kingdom Death Monster. But with that whole idea, right, it's not just fantasy. You can have space settings as well. These broad settings can tell great stories as long as you are knowledgeable of them. Then you can be a DM and effectively run entire games within those settings. Even other fantasy settings, like in D&D, they have multiple different variety, like high fantasy, low fantasy, street level fantasy. Places like Sharn are high fantasy, right? There's all kinds of different types of things going on. They even throw in mixes of like movie noir, right? And airships and all kinds of created magic, right? Magic created via whether it's an animated object like the Warforged. We're not really animated, but like a golem or something. But constructed magic, where artificers, right? They can replicate magic with mechanical things, right? And then there's really low fantasy, which is really grit and grime, almost more towards like Lord of the Ring ends, where there's magic, but it's very rare and reserved to, if you were a magic user, you are considered very strong, right? You're rare within the setting, right? There's only a couple wizards in the setting of Lord of the Rings. And all those settings, they're all going to work very well, and they're all going to work fine. Be it that you have a DM that wants to tell a story and knows where they're going using that setting. Now, when it comes to storytelling with a DM or playing Dungeons & Dragons specifically, I'm going to stick to Dungeons & Dragons specifically. Now, that's just because that's the game that I've DM'd the most, so I can speak from a DM's perspective more so than the other games. But when you sit down to a table and stuff like that, there's other games, like I said, Dungeon Crawl Classics. There are games where the hero's not designed to survive. This is the setting like Kingdom Death. But in general, Dungeons & Dragons, the players sit down, they create a hero, right? Even if they create a chaotic evil character, you're still going to be a hero. Even if everyone is chaotic evil, you're still going to be someone of power who's going to survive until the end. Not always, but character death in a game like Dungeons & Dragons should be a monumentous event. It should be a a campaign-worthy notation when a character dies, right? When a player character dies. And that's a good thing, because people are going to want to play their character until the end, and that's how the game is designed to work. When you sit down at the table to join a campaign, you're thinking, I'm going to create this character, and then their story is going to be told. And the DM and I are going to work together to reach a conclusion that we feel is beneficial for both of our standpoints. The DM will have a story that comes to a conclusion, and I'll have a story arc that I feel compelled my character to the end, and they did what they thought was either good or what they needed to do in that moment when the story concludes. And that's all great. Now, it does wind up going down some weird paths when you have things like that, where you're creating all these books that have all these kinds of things, and you're catering to DMs who need supplement books, and then players who need supplement books. So normally what would happen is Wizards of the Coast or TSR or whatever, when they printed Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to make a book that's a DM book. Like, for instance, the Fiend Folio, right? This is an entire book that's just going to list out all kinds of demons from Underworld and the Abyss and the Nine Hells and places like that, right? This is a DM supplement book. It's going to help the DM tell a story, give them more monsters, it's going to stat them out, and the DM can use this book to help them with their setting that they're using for their game. Or you have things like Libris Mortis, right? The book of the damned, no, the Book of the Undead is Libris Mortis. This has a lich on the cover. It's an undead lich. It's a necromancer raising things on the cover, right? Another DM supplement book. It's meant to help the DM tell the story that they want to tell using what is here written in the book. But at the same exact time, to come along with Libris Mortis, you're going to get things like Heroes of Horror, right? Heroes of Horror is a PC supplement book where you're going to give characters all kinds of neat stuff that they can use as well, right? If the DM's getting a whole bunch of new toys, you want your players to get a whole bunch of new toys. But that leads to books like this being created, right? The Heroes of Horror book. If you're going to play an undead or horror campaign, why don't you use some of these hero classes in here? This book, right out of the gate, this book has what's in it is a dread necromancer is in this book. You could just make a straight up necromancer. This is a true necromancer, right? There's necromancy spells in Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. But this is just a dread necromancer. This is an organic necromancer that is not a cleric that's using necromancy or trying to hide they're a necromancer. No, you're just a straight up necromancer. Starting at 2nd level, you just start becoming a lich just organically. And by the time you hit level 20, you just get lich transformation. You are just now a lich. You just have a phylactery. You don't have to expend gold. You don't have to expend any experience points to get it. You just are one of those things, right? And that's the arc of that character. It's written out for you right here in the book. It's expecting you to slowly transform into a lich going from level 1 to 20. Should a player ever become a lich? Well, that's debatable depending up to the DM, but that's crazy, right? That's the kind of arc that you expect from a Dungeons and Dragons game, right? Your players will sit down and they'll expect, well, if I'm going to play this entire campaign, I should expect my character's arc to see an end, right? And now the DM I'm going to play a dread necromancer. Guess what, DM? Now you have to slowly deal with a player character who's chaotic evil, pure necromancer, also slowly becoming a lich until 20th level when they literally will be a lich with a phylactery and everything. Like the embodiment of evil, right? Might as well just cut off their hand and pull out their eye at that point. But that's the kind of thing, right? That's what's expected when players submit down. It's the expectation of players going into the game, that their character is a part of the story and you're going to tell a communal story. Now, that's fine. That's great. I still love Dungeons & Dragons for all of that. All aside, that's how it works. I will gladly help see characters all the way to the end. I know, Critical Role, things like that. They're hugely successful, right? It's very entertaining to watch characters proceed all the way to the end of their stories. In Critical Role, sometimes players do die in Critical Role. However, it's the expectation, right? With Kingdom Death Monster, on the other hand, it's organic storytelling told at random, and you're never going to know exactly what it is you will get out of it. It's a story that runs DMless, which is why it goes down to random rolls and everything. However, it's the setting of which the random events and the card pulls, everything revolves around it, and why it's the type of setting that you just can't get from, well, you can, but it's harder to recreate. It takes, what Kingdom Death did is something that is really hard. Usually DMs have to hide it. They add mystique. They say, just because I'm going to describe something out of the monster manual, right? Just because I'm going to describe something out of this book, I know the players have probably read monster manuals. They're just going to subvert expectations and just say, what's in that book might not be what you're fighting. It may look and sound and talk like a duck, but it might not be a duck, right? That's what DMs usually set. That's the precedent going in that they're all going to spend, right? You do your session 0, you create all your characters. The DM says, well, this is where I'm going to play. We're going to use Forgotten Realms. We're going to play in Faerun. We're going to play Sword Coast, right? We're going to do all those kind of things, right? Or maybe, as I mentioned, with Eberron and Sharn and all that. That's the expectation being set right away. So players have a setting they can look at and go, well, I want to be from this area, or I want to be from Waterdeep. It gives them familiarity with the setting. And familiarity with what you're playing and what you're doing makes things harder. Well, it's not harder. It's convenient for the player and it's convenient for the DM. But from a natural storytelling perspective, if you got rid of all that, if you just had a setting where you don't know what's going on and everything around you is vague and covered in darkness and everything is just naturally mysterious, even if you were to have a DM run the setting of Kingdom Death, even they wouldn't be able to know. And you can just subvert all those conversations, right? Anything that you encounter might not be what it appears to be. And in fact, it uses the Insanity system, which is the same as, Arkham Horror, or Call of Cthulhu, not Arkham Horror, Call of Cthulhu, the tabletop RPG game that takes place in Arkham. Call of Cthulhu uses the Madness system, where insanity and characters slowly break. That's the same thing with Kingdom Death. However, you don't slowly break. You just might always be insane. And you don't have a full grasp on what's going on ever at any point. And that's what I'd like to share with you. How organic storytelling, driven by nothing but cards and vagueness, could offer a player unique stories if they're looking to find them. That's the other thing. With Kingdom Death, it's not meant to tell it. Well, it's designed to tell stories, but if with a little imagination, a little creativity, you can have long-lasting campaign stories throughout your entirety of your gameplay. It's the type of story that it takes. If I, from all the times I've DM'd, right, I consider myself to be preferred. I would prefer to DM, but I always gladly play Dungeons and Dragons. If it's the choice between can I DM a game or just not playing Dungeons and Dragons, I would rather play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So advice to DMs would be reactive storytelling. It's hard to do reactive storytelling. It's some people view it as railroading, right? When a DM is not good at reactive storytelling, players feel railroaded, which is unfair, right? I never liked the idea or the concept of you just can't never railroad your players, right? I think that's just stupid and bad advice, really. It's not that you don't railroad your players. You just need to be a good reactive storyteller, right? You need to have an ending in mind where you want to go with your story. Otherwise, it's going to suck, regardless of if it's sandbox or not sandbox. The players will clearly tell, like, by the third or fourth game that you don't know exactly where you're going. But if you just know where it is you want to go, and if things start to slide off the rails or whatever, that's fine. You just tell good reactive storytelling, right? You're just a very highly reactive DM. When someone does something, you just let them do it, and then alter what you have already planned reactively, right? That's what a lot of Kingdom Death storytelling is. It's reactive. Because when you play Kingdom Death, you're going to have a timeline. Exactly what's going to happen. You're going to know. You can even look ahead and plan for what's coming up. But you never know what's going to happen in between there. In fact, it's those in-between there moments that tell a great organic story. And this video now, I want to just share that with you. An example of how a game that has a pre-written timeline, I know exactly where it's going to end. I can't avoid that ending. If I make it to the end, I know what the end point is. I can see it when I start. That's how railroaded I am. I know exactly what's going to come up in year 5, year 9, year 12, year 16, all the way to 30. I have all the beaten path points laid out right in front of me, and I'm going to go through them. And there's no stopping me. But it's all the in-between of those years. All the stuff that happens at random. All that. That's what makes it such a vibrant setting to play in. That's what DMs should learn from Kingdom Death. If you've never played Kingdom Death or something, it might just be the best setting you've never heard of. And it really is a great setting. So I want to just share with you now. On this channel, I play a lot of Kingdom Death. I've done 2 full seasons. Well, the second season is at a natural endpoint. And before I continued, I wanted to make these videos. I always said, you know what, I've had this narrative in my head that slowly unfolded, and I've kept it with me, and I've shown it throughout Season 1 and Season 2, and now all the things are all going to react. It's my own headcanon, because that's how I like to play when I play it. I take the event, I write down all the events or all the happenings that happen to each one of my characters, and then I keep myself entertained by storytelling. That's what keeps me going through the game, regardless of all the railroading that's going to happen by the game. The game is going to put me in a situation. I know exactly what it's going to be, and I'm forced to respond. But all the random stuff that happens, that's organic storytelling to me. And then I just write it all down. And I'll now... the way I'm going to share this is... This is going to be multiple videos. But I'm going to go through the narrative from this point forward. So if you're just here to wonder what the Kingdom Death setting is and what it's like, just stay for another 5 minutes. And then if you're enjoying the narrative, great. Otherwise, I'm just going to start by describing the broad setting. I'm not going to get into all the details. I'm going to tell you now using typical storytelling fashion, meaning cliffhangers and everything. I'm not going to explain everything up front, but I'll set the stage for those who only want to listen to the story setting of what Kingdom Death is. So, Kingdom Death. Kingdom Death monsters specifically. Kingdom Death is a line of miniatures. Now, there's fantasy miniatures, normal miniatures, but they're all connected in a world, which could be Kingdom Death Monster, could be a different world, just the world of Kingdom Death. But the Kingdom Death Monster board game takes place in the world of Monster, right? It's some of those elements, the miniatures they have every day, or the generic miniatures, or the generic fantasy miniatures, they find their ways into Kingdom Death through unexplained means, but they're all connected. All those lines of miniatures could all end up in the monster world. How they get there, I could explain it, but I'm not going to right now. Also because I don't know 100%, but pretty sure. But it's a world of no sunlight. It's a pitch black world. Not pitch black. There's natural light, and probably the survivors or the humans on the world, they can still see. It's not completely pitch black. There's light enough for them to make out and live normally. So now where the game takes place for the most part right now is the Plane of Stone Faces. The Plane of Stone Faces is one of the many biomes in Kingdom Death. It doesn't necessarily mean... It's just where a large majority of stone faces tend to be, right? There's other things going on in the plane, but... So that means the ground, everything is going to be these doll-like stone faces that are all looking up, and that's how they're just littering the entire ground. And when you open up the Kingdom Death book, the very first thing you'll see is this black and white image of the sculptor. Now, what exactly the sculptor is, it's hard to say. It could be an entity. It definitely is an entity, but it's whether it's knowingly controlling multiple because there's multiple of these human-sized things with a cleft jawline. They're very weird looking, and they run around and they carve the stone faces into the ground, and they just make them wherever they go. And there's lots of them. How many of them, you don't know. They vary in sizes. That's why the sizes of the stone faces vary. Whether it's a collective mind of this entity, it's probably more likely, because the setting, deals with insanity and derangement, it's probably more likely that the sculptor itself is a fractured mind. It's probably just doing these stone face carvings out of reactive, or just like a kind of like a zombie eats, right? It's probably just carving these faces just because that's what it does. That's what it always did. That's what it knows to do. It's probably that all these different sculptors are probably one part of a fractured mind. That's how I like to think of it. But it could be that they're a hive mind and they're all singular-minded, all controlled by the one entity itself. It's hard to say, but that's how these stone faces get on the ground. And they may have likenesses of your survivor. So what exactly is a survivor? A survivor is the humanoid of the setting. It's what the character is going to be using. It's what we're meant as a player to relate to. They are, for all intents and purposes, humans. They look like humans. They do everything like humans. They give birth like humans. They have genders like humans. They have bodies like humans. They eat like humans. They're just humans, right? There's probably some slight alteration in some of them that makes them non-human, but categorically speaking, everything in the world of Kingdom Death is a monster, including the player. You were playing a monster. What type of monster? Who knows? That's the difference between, again, lawful, evil, chaotic, true, neutral. Whatever that means is whatever it means to you. But the way the game starts is in this plane of stone faces, you are a small, select number of survivors who were dreaming a dream, and you awake from the sound of other survivors being attacked. The four survivors, they're born with black ink on their eyes, and they rub it away when they wake up. Whatever that might be, it's not 100% confirmed how those get into existence, but what the black ink exactly is unconfirmed right now. But I could try to explain it, but I'm not going to. But either way, they're born. They're not. Might not even be born. They just have black ink on them, and they awaken in this plane of stone faces. And some of them are being ripped apart by a white lion. A white lion with human hands. He rips through all these survivors. Now, 4 of these survivors, they're desperate to survive. That's what they do. That's all they want to do. They just want to survive. Like any human, their natural instincts kicked in to defend themselves. And they reach into the ground and they pull up a piece of the stone face, right? A deadly stone, even though it's not deadly in the game. It's a fragmented stone, right? Or it's not sharp, I should say. Yeah, it's not sharp or deadly, actually. But it's a stone, and they use it to defend themselves. And they're just they have lanterns all around them to help them see in the darkness, and that's it. And then the game starts with those 4 survivors with their founding stones attacking this white lion and trying to kill it. Now, again, so this is the setting. This is the very broad setting of Kingdom Death. So, from this point forward, the organic storytelling, which I'll tell you, is what happened to me. Now, you are welcome to watch all of my Season 1 and Season 2. That will be the story I'm about to tell you. It's going to unfold. For everyone who's watched Season 1 or Season 2, here's the story that I've always said I've always had headcanon. The thing that I've always wanted to do for everyone. I'm so grateful that everyone stuck with me and I've kept going, and I'm glad I get to share this with you now. But if you were just interested in what exactly makes Kingdom Death one of the best settings you've never heard of and how it compares to tabletop RPGs, thank you so much. Now let's get into my story. The story that Kingdom Death presented me. And I swear I didn't even know it was going to happen even when I started playing it. It's not like I had any of this written beforehand. In fact, one of the main characters I didn't even know. It was just a name that was suggested to me. But see, everything in Season 1 and Season 2 will now be covered. And you'll see, you can go back and watch the episodes and see how exactly the game does organically. You can see how all these story points came up. But it took a while for me to gather them all up, but I did. So we begin with our 4 survivors. The Season 1 survivors were Riley was one female, Aurora was another female, Miles was a male, and Wit was a male. Those were the 4 survivors. It's good to do 2 females, 2 males, again, because they're basically humans. So if you want to make more humans, male and females help. So, again, those 4 were the original survivors. They ended up killing the white lion, and after the white lion, they gather up, they take out all the parts of it, rip it apart, take some for food, and then they're left to wander the plain of stone faces. Where exactly they would go? Well, they're drawn to a light, or like they're drawn to light, right? In this case, where that light could be found was around a massive horde, like a massive pile of lanterns, some lit, some unlit, large majority of them lit, because that's how it draws them to here. And when our 4 survivors, Riley, Aurora, Miles, and Wit, when they reach this lantern horde, they find a small cluster of other survivors, 8 to be exact. And with those 8, they create a settlement around this lantern horde. Now, how time works in Kingdom Death is because there's no way for survivors to really track time themselves. They don't have means to do so. They instinctively or reactively find some way of tracking a form of time. How long it is, no one knows, but in relation for us, how long it is for us, no one knows. But for them, it is how long a lantern stays lit. And they call it a lantern year. So when you pluck a lantern from the lantern horde and you stick it on you hang it from somewhere in the town square or something, by the time that lantern, the distance the time from being plucked off the lantern horde and hung is 1 year. Again, what 1 year is, who knows? That's just what they call it. Now, there are other aspects to being around this lantern horde. Being around the lantern horde sparks innovation within survivors. Being around without a lantern horde, you might not be able to innovate, right? The survivors, they might not, whether or not it's the horde that helps them or just the fact that being around other people in a settlement, in a community, collectively, they can create things. It's the other thing is when they're within the Lantern Horde, when they're within the settlement, they can speak language to one another. They develop their own language. So now all 12 of our survivors have their own language, whether or not it's from being around the Lantern Horde or whether it's something that would have happened organically. You can never tell, but in our case, the Lantern Horde provided all these things once we arrived on the first day. So what they do, they take a lantern off, experiment it, go hang it up, and this triggers the first lantern year. Now, during the fight, Kingdom Death Monster has a way of tracking your insanity, right? Time spent in the darkness, you're going to become less and less sane, right? There's an insanity track to Kingdom Death as survivors fight more, as they go off, as they hunt, as they hang around in this world more, they become more insane. They accumulate insanity. Whether or not, a trackable number, because it is a game, this is a mechanic, whether or not this trackable number has actual meaning to how insane someone is, don't know, but there is a point at which there is a sane survivor and an insane survivor. So there are also disorders, right? Survivors are flawed humans, or flawed monsters, or flawed whatever. Look, the book itself even calls them humans from time to time. There are humans. They're just monsters. Humans can be monsters. So if I happen to call them humans or monsters, it doesn't matter, right? They're just humanoid. So these derangements, right, because of the harsh reality of world around them, this darkness that's wherever they go, and it's a thick, palpable darkness, right? You can see the darkness, right? It's whether it's a living thing or whatever, who knows? But it can be felt and seen. So this slowly this maddening world around them, survivors are prone to being flawed, and survivors gain disorders. Now, during the White Lion fight, Miles decided he came down with a disorder, right? During the fight, he was struck with a brain injury, and this changed him forever by giving him a disorder. He has a fear of the dark disorder, meaning that he's never going to want to leave this settlement horde ever again. He retires, he needs this light, he's never going to go hunting ever again, Miles. Now, what that means is we have to take out one of the other 8 that were just here when we created our new settlement. So with that, the first hunt, we change up a little bit. We still take Aurora and Riley, the 2 females, and we change up, can't take Miles, and we don't take Whit because I think he had a broken arm after the fight. So we change it up. We take Clayton and Ollie, are 2 new ones that go out. And the way the horde works is it drives back stronger monsters, right? When the survivors are in the presence of this lantern horde, they feel a serene comfort within the walls or within the direct area around the settlement. This is also felt by monsters, and it keeps the stronger monsters away, right? Only the weaker monsters, the one who are desperate to eat, they'll come as close to the settlement as possible because they're desperate for food, and survivors are food. So it's just like normal. The stronger monsters can stay out farther away. They don't need to go near hordes. They can just kill other monsters to eat. However, the weaker ones might not be able to kill other monsters, so they prey on survivors. And that draws them closer to the settlement, and since they are weaker, survivors with less gear can take them on. So hunts they never have to really go that far out into the darkness to begin with. So you just fight them right outside the settlement or not far from the settlement and mainly stick to white lions. Now, again, the settlement would go out, fight another white lion, kill it, bring it back to the settlement, feed them for however long it is. By when they return, the lantern has now gone out. They take another lit lantern from the hoard, hang up another one, and thus begins the cycle. Now we are lantern year 2, as we would call it. All these things will happen. Now they'll continue and continue and continue through different lantern years for a certain amount of time on the timeline. That's how time is kept. So survivors can track something. They have a tangible calendar that they probably work. So then as they use the resources, they come back to the settlement and they innovate. And they make more weapons, and they make new fighting tactics or new ways for them to, to fight. Whether it gives them like inner lanterns or more power to them. There are other ways. Fighting, you gain age, which age is. It sounds like you're going older, but it's just necessarily, age is not necessarily. It's an amalgam of a lot of things. Whether it's hunt experience, just the amount of time you've spent in the world doing other things, the amount of training you've done. It's not necessarily how old you are. It's not representative of that. It's just skilled, right? It's like it's just a amalgam, for lack of a better word. It's just an amalgam of all those things, simplified down to being age. Again, this starts off, same Lantern Year 3, once again. Now, they hang up, go to another one. This time passes, settlements thrive. This time, Lantern Year 3, again, before it goes out, you're given the event of Endless Screams. Now, this event is, you hear off in the distance a new type of monster, right? Not just a white lion. There's another monster out there. It's something new. Maddening screams that cause people cause insane survivors to do crazy things or wander off into the darkness after these sounds. Either way, a new type of monster that you can now hunt, which would be the screaming antelope. There's introduction events like this on the timeline as you reach certain points. So with that said, again, you go out, fight. This time fought another white lion because they're the easiest at this point. Survivors are good at killing them. We know how to fight them. Makes for easy kills. Fight a white lion, come back, return to the settlement, and then every year you get settlement cards, which are given, they're random events that are added that make that year more flavorful. So, draw the settlement event, and you get all kinds of random things can happen. In this case, one of the first ones that we got was cracks in the ground. Cracks in the ground is just some tremor all of a sudden happens when the returning survivors come back with their lion hunt. And the ground just splits below one of them and someone just falls in and dies. Thus, the story of Ollie is now just done. Because he's just been eaten by the ground. Hence what I was talking about earlier when you have these expectation, right? The expectation of a player that they're just going to make it. Now, like I said, in Call of Cthulhu and Dungeon Crawl Classics, other tabletop games, that expectation is subverted, right? The players don't have that when they reach the table. They're told maybe you should make multiple characters or something. And that's what Kingdom Death does too. It uses that you never know what's going to happen randomly and people are going to die. So best not to get attached to your survivors. Use that kind of thing. However, you can get attached to your survivors. It's fine. Just have to just realize that they might die. Right? You just have to know that going in. So, thus ends the end of Ollie. What does that mean when a survivor finally dies? Well, the settlement needs to decide how to deal with that. Right? The game presents you with two options at this point. You can either cannibalize, which kind of makes no sense, because this first death being from cracks in the ground, he's just down at the bottom. We wouldn't know to eat him anyway. Or graves. Now, in this case, this settlement decided to make graves. So they go off, they make a gravestone for Ollie and all those things. And one survivor, whose name is Caressa, she decides to mark herself up as a reminder for the death of Ollie. So these weird types of individual storytelling that you now get via the game system, and then you just add these events to your characters. After that, after finally deciding what to do with the body, we have what was it called? The Crone's Tail now visits the settlement, which is a weird, very elderly survivor approaches the outside of the settlement. She comes to the walls of the settlement, talks about some garden that a monster guards, and then dies. And when she dies, a flower blossoms from her body, which is very weird. And what do you instantly do? Well, of course, you pick the flower. And feeling brave all of a sudden, Caressa just picks the flower. Why not, right? What could be the worst that would happen in a situation like this? So, with these stories that randomly happen, these events that randomly happen, these planned events that get added, this curses Caressa, right? This flower that she now always carries around with her, it's cursed. It gives her special bonuses and everything, but it changes her, and she is cursed now, holding this. So, naturally, got to find out what that person was talking about. Got to investigate this garden that's being guarded by a monster. So, thus, Lantern Year 4 begins. We go out, hunt the Flower Knight. Now, the Flower Knight is a weird, interesting place. Or the Flower Knight where it lives is a weird, interesting place. Flower Knight itself is also weird and interesting, but it lives in the Abyssal Woods, which is, again, why I said the Plain of Stone Faces is not the only biome, not the only place in this world. It's just a majority of it happens to have random faces all over. Even the Abyssal Woods will still have stone faces on the ground. It's more so that the Plain of Stone Faces is abundant with them. It's almost all that it is. It must have been where the scribe started. But, they venture out, they go everywhere. Those scribe entities. Now, or sculptor entities, not scribe. Sculptor. Hopefully I said sculptor in the beginning, not scribe. But, so the Abyssal Woods is blocked off by a giant gate. And this is such an interesting thing, this gate. When the survivors approach on their hunt to get to where they were told to go for the Flower Knight, they are met with the forest gate. And in order to open it, you need to give up something. You need to either give blood to the gate, gain random disorders, take a severe injury, gain negative tokens. All these things which will affect you and your survivor, just so they can pass into the gate to prove whether or not it's proving worthy or whatever it is. But it's a choice. So, again, survivors give up their blood to get in here. We fight the Flower Knight, kill the Flower Knight, and come back with different types of resources, as this was the first different type of monster that we have fought outside of the White Lion. The flower resources you get from the Flower Knight are very weird. They do very weird and interesting things. Some of them can turn into survivors from their the Warbling Bloom. It's a flower with a survivor face. It's very weird. Some can be consumed for instant benefits. However, what we decide to do is craft a Vespertine bow. When we go back to the settlement, these flowers trigger these memories, and it allow us to use those memories to craft gear. And the gear that we chose was the Vespertine bow, which was a really good bow. So, the same year, now, again, coming back from the Flower Knight, you go get the lantern, another Lantern Year gone. The lantern light burns out, the exhausted lantern's thrown on the exhausted horde. Back to the horde, exhausted is what I meant. Take another one fresh, hang it up away from the horde, watch it tick down. Again, now this starts Lantern Year 5 or 4. Yeah, Lantern Year 4. Yeah. Also, another weird thing, just a little bit of foreshadowing. As I was going back and researching all this stuff, on our way to the Abyssal Woods, on our way to that, we actually had the Sword in the Stone event. Which is a stone that's locked in sword. And when someone tries to pull it out, all of our survivors had failed pulling it out. But it's there. There's a sword in the stone. We did pass it in season 1. Just a little bit of foreshadowing. I couldn't believe that I saw that we actually had that a long time before. So, back to where we were. The first survivors are born. So when survivors are born, this is between Riley and Miles. They were the first ones to ever have a child. The child is born without the ink on their eyes. They have, this is Tyson. Now, Tyson was the firstborn survivor in season 1. He's the first one, and when that happens, you have to choose how it is your settlement will raise children. You can do it like the Spartans, where it's survival of the fittest, only the strongest survive, and they're stronger survivors. Or you can do protect the young, where any type of birth is nourished and protected. This settlement went with protect the young. I was hoping, because it's easier to have more survivors when you have protect the young. You can have a lot of them, and there was things that I was planning on doing with that, but did not come to fruition. So this settlement decides that all life is valuable. That's how they're going to view it. Any survivor born in the settlement will be protected and hopefully brought about to hunting age, so where they can contribute and go out on hunts. And the first example of this was Tyson. He is born to Riley and Miles. Now, again, so next year, I think I actually added a year of Lantern. Let me think. Yeah, I think there was this is the year before the first Nemesis. This is the last hunt before the first Nemesis. I think I actually skipped a year, or I forgot to describe one year. Either way, this is the last year before the Nemesis. Another white lion after the Flower Night. Again, it's the same ones to go out. It's beneficial to always take the same survivors. So Riley, Aurora, Caressa, you want to build those ones up so they can trigger the age points, like I said. Because the more hunts, the more fights they're involved with, the more training they do with their weapon. It's all beneficial. And time is finite for a survivor. They're not going to live forever. And even if they do live that long, they can't hunt forever, that's for sure. They will retire eventually. Now, with that said, you always want to take out the same survivors. And in this case, it would be Riley and everything, and we go and we fight another white lion. The last one with our last free available time before we reach the Nemesis encounter, and Riley dies. Riley is killed fighting a white lion. She actually gets her head to explode. She is badly one-shot. Her head just explodes. And she was one of the original 4. One of the only ones left now that can actually fight. The other one is Fear of the Dark, which is Miles, and Wit had a broken arm. So now it's just down to Aurora. She's the only one left from the original starting 4. Riley was thriving. She was really strong. But again, White Lion gets the best of her. Head explodes from a reaction. After she attacked the White Lion, it triggered something, a trap, and then... it triggered something else. And then Surge triggered the trap. It was really bad. But anyway, it led to her head exploding. And this triggers vengeance within Caressa. She gains the vengeance fighting art. So they return from their hunt. And instantly something is triggered within Caressa. She has a rivalry with one of the other survivors I took out. His name was Wave. Just again, another replacement for someone who was injured. A rivalry spurks via the settlement event cards, and during the rivalry, Cressa just is so overcome with this vengeance that she just outright kills Wave. Outright just kills him because of the settlement event. So it's 2 deaths through this time, and with all this time, you get more survivors because we had so many endeavors because of the multiple deaths. We were able to do some more, birth some more survivors, which would be born to, I think it was, Bria and Wit, I think, were the 2 to do this. Can't remember exactly now. But they were the 2. I don't know, Bria and, I might have been Miles, because Riley died. I can't remember exactly who it was. But anyway, Bria was another one of the original 8 survivors. they give birth to twins. The twins' name are Ken and Kenna. They are born the year right before the Butcher shows up. We also, right before doing Intimacy, we also innovated Clan of Death. Because of all the death and killing, we've decided that these survivors are going to be super strong. They're going to stand up to the darkness. They're going to stand up to all these monsters and become stronger and become monsters themselves. They're a Clan of Death. That's hence why Caressa just happens to just kill them outright. Even fighting between themselves, they kill each other. It's not a good look for the settlement. It's not off to a good start. But because of that, become Clan of Death. Clan of Death makes all newborns even stronger. So Ken and Kenna are born really, really strong. It was so fortunate that there were two born at the same exact time, right after getting Clan of Death. However, the nemesis then comes, which is the Butcher. Now, the Butcher just shows up and waits outside the settlement for the hunting party. He doesn't even come into the settlement. He just stands out there and wait. And what the Butcher is, he's this armor-clad, just hulking, dual-wielding cleavers. He's this just blind fury who's just sitting outside the settlement waiting for a hunting party to leave. Unknown why he's there exactly. But what he is he's wearing he's just huge, full plate. He's got a mask over his face, just pig skull shoulders, and a huge cape on his back, and the whole cape is strewn with lanterns, and on the lanterns are covered with skin faces. The Butcher goes around, he tears the face right off. He cuts it with his cleaver and rips it right off, and then wraps it around the lantern of the person he killed and hangs it on his back. The Butcher is not a good thing, right? This is the first nemesis encounter that the settlement will be faced with. And with this nemesis encounter, just by luck, because we've gotten Clan of Death, I think I could actually have taken it down. So, you send out Ken and Kenna, both go out, because of their huge new stat bonuses. It is super beneficial for this fight. So they go out. Kenna has her very first fight. She even kills the Butcher. The settlement wins against the Butcher. Almost decapitates him. Missed the death blow by one card. If I would have hit the death blow, they would have been decapitated. Now, with that huge triumph, right? After the Butcher, they do the Hands of Heat settlement event, or the Hands of Heat story event. And Hands of Heat, you experiment with these lanterns, right? You've now killed this Butcher. Everybody in the settlement is super happy about it. You experiment with lanterns. What this means is you throw a lantern down to the ground, you find out what's inside, and you get the Hands of Heat, right? Whatever's in there, like a gel. It's like a liquid gel that's inside these lanterns, and it's really strong and blazing hot. And you can see the Hands of Heat. And this is how you create the lantern oven, right? This is a way for you to create and smelt some of your exhausted lanterns, right? These scrap lanterns. You can use this heat, melt it down, and get yourself some iron, refined iron. Well, not refined iron, but it's, you get iron. You rework the old exhausted lanterns into iron. You can make scrap weapons with the blacksmith. This propels all kinds of new innovations, all kinds of new things, all because of your experimentation with these lanterns. Now, with that, the story event with getting this lantern oven triggers the fifth innovation within the settlement. And when the fifth innovation comes, you are visited by a hooded knight. When your settlement has reached enough innovation, it sparks a warrior clad in armor and everything, and wearing a very black hood, carrying a huge black sword, to come to the settlement. It's the hooded knight. And what the hooded knight does is it comes and it picks out someone, a very specific, deliberate person who was involved with the last fight. And because we sent out new people, we sent out Ken and Kenna and Bria, their mom, who had all never hunted before. That left Tyson, who was one of the stronger survivors, Not Aurora. We did not use any of them. We sent out Tyson to have the best chance. They all gained their hunt experience. So Tyson was the most experienced returning survivor. He is looked at by the Twilight Knight, right? It's a Twilight Knight from the Twilight Order. Now, what the Twilight Order actually is, I'll get into that later when they return. But they hand over a tattered parcel, which is just a sword, one of their Twilight swords. It's wrapped up, and they hand it over, and you get the cloak, and you get a lantern, and you get the sword, you get all this stuff, and they all hand it to Tyson. And again, the sword is cursed. Now, what the sword also is sentient, meaning that the sword, you need to be insane to work it, right? You can't just wield a Twilight sword. You need to be insane. And it's sentient, meaning that it talks to you. You can hear it when you use it. It speaks to you, to the wielder. You can hear it. Whether or not this actually happens or not, who knows? But you need to be insane in order to wield it. Sane survivors cannot wield it. There are multiple reasons or things I'll get into when the time comes for the Twilight Knight, but I want to wrap this one up here. So, now Tyson has himself a new Twilight sword thanks to the Hooded Knight. What will happen now is we'll go out, fight yet another lion, I think it was. It might have been a screaming antelope at this point. I forget exactly what it was. But on this hunt, they come across a stone figure. It's just a man sitting, thinking, locked in stone, trapped in stone. Tyson approaches it, touches it, and instantly Tyson becomes stone, and the stone figure is swapped with him. The Twilight Sword is gone, and in replace is Rodin. Now, Rodin was just a survivor trapped in stone, just out on the hunt that we happened to encounter. Who knows how long he has been there? Who knows how long or when it happened to him? Who knows where he came from or anything like that? He joins the hunting party without question. He's a shield specialist. He's all kinds of insane. He believes himself to be immortal. There's all kinds of craziness happens with this guy. But he joins the hunting party in replace of Tyson, keeping us at our 4 for our departing. And again, this time for departing was Aurora again, because it's no risk of really death because of not finding a nemesis. But it was Aurora, Tyson, Ken, and Caressa, the stronger ones of our settlement. Ken being, one of the newer ones that replaced Wave, who had died. Now we have Rodin. For Tyson is gone. Tyson is just left behind in the stone. Who knows when again we'll ever encounter Tyson, or if we would ever encounter him, right? You never know. Could be just like Rodin here. You never know when it will happen. But he's trapped now in that stone forever. He's just dead to us. His Twilight Sword's gone. Everything's left behind. It's just all gone, and he's left with a screaming face as he's just turned to stone, a stone statue. So, we continue on our way. Survivors kill everyone. That's the end of the other White Lion. Come back to the settlement, just like always. Lantern's out. Grab a new lantern from the thing. Begin marking the next lantern year. We change out the lantern. Start a new lantern year. This year, we are visited by the Armored Strangers. Now, what the Armored Strangers are again, clad full plate. They wear everything. They have lantern halberds, which are just these huge, huge halberds with a lantern on the top of them. Almost like they're guiding the way for something. These multiples of them show up and just begin counting the number of survivors that are in the settlement. And they take their lantern halberd and they decide the fate of the settlement based on their population numbers. Now, we had a high population number, so what that resulted in was them going around and destroying some of our innovations, and they just destroyed outright the lantern oven, which is a bad place to be in. You don't want to lose lantern oven. Especially our settlement, because did not have ammonia. Can't get it back right away. Would result in fighting either Gorms or White Lions to try to get ammonia back. or to get it at all. We never had it. And you can't make Lantern Oven without getting it from the story event, Hands of Heat, or you got to research it yourself. We don't have that option. So that's a very bad one to lose. Stupid armored strangers then leave, destroying the settlement, trying to set it back because we were well over their threshold of what they deemed to be allowed. Now, all this craziness, right? Now you're talking butchers coming, cutting the faces off of people, wearing them in their back, putting their lanterns on. You've got cracks in the ground, destroying all of the... Or cracks in the ground, just killing people outright. Our clan of death, where Caressa's just killing people. You got white lions just blowing up the heads of Riley. People turning into stone. All of these things have all happened in front of Aurora, right? She's been there for all of this. She's one of the original ones. So it's her and Miles. Miles is the other one. The two original ones, right? They would like to have children, but they just are stricken with grief, overwhelmed by this whole world, right? They're destroyed mentally, right, by this world. Why would you want to... anyone born here would be just it's a death sentence, right? The world is out to get survivors. It's a very bad place to be, right? You are not at the top of the food chain. You are not powerful. Everything sits around hunting you. The farther you get from the Lantern Horde, the stronger things get. So Aurora and Miles just give up. That's it. They just walk off into the darkness, into the settlement, just giving up. They don't take any gear with them. They're just done with the world, right? They've pretty much given up on it. And as they walk, they come across a river of blood. Now, the river of blood is not a abnormality. It's just a thing. There are multiple of them. But they find a crying child in a wicker basket. So the two of them gather up this child in the wicker basket, take them back to the settlement, or take her back to the settlement, I should say. It's definitely a female. They take her back to the settlement and decide that, you know what, this world is a terrible place, but maybe we could make it better. We could say, obviously, other survivors somewhere else are trying to survive, and they're the same thing we thought. We just give up on this baby. Maybe someone else could save it. Just set it off down the river of blood. Maybe it will go someplace where someone else is more fit to raise it more safely than what they could, right? So they find this survivor. They name her Lightning. She grows up, and the rest of the settlement thinks of, sees her as a leader, right? She has a disorder where she's quixotic, right? She feels the weight of the world is bearing down. Her Aurora has always filled her with this notion that the world is so bad and everything is so dark, but you were like the light that showed us, light that shined through the darkness, right? So she's filled with she's got a disorder. She's quixotic. She feels an overwhelming responsibility. It's like the weight of the world it carries on her, right? She's got that disorder, and the settlement can sense this, right? So she becomes a undisputed leader, right? They view her as a leader. As she grows up throughout the settlement events before the next hunts, she learns to fight the same way that Aurora does. Aurora, being one of the originals, she used Fist and Tooth, right? That was her weapon of choice. She's very good. She's like a monk. She just needs her fists and her teeth. She doesn't need a weapon to kill monsters. Aurora is very good. She is very trained in that. She's a Fist and Tooth specialist at this point. So Lightning is raised just like her to be a Fist and Tooth specialist. She has the fighting. So this is how she develops the fighting art of the Monster Claw style, which makes her Fist and Tooth more accurate. She's just raised this way. The settlement can feel this. And through her disorder, through quixotic, through all these things, through her style of fighting where she doesn't need weapons, this is where the settlement gains their principle of accepting the darkness, right? They just accept this world as dark as it could possibly be. This is the world that they have to live in. They're going to have to endure this. The philosophy of Lightning is that, the world is monsters, right? We're all monsters. It's just we make the best of it. So, with that, I'm going to end this part. The next parts coming out will be the rest of Season 1, all the story all the way through. And then I'll start doing Season 2, all of that story all the way through. So hopefully this was entertaining. Hopefully this was enjoyable. I'm going to finish up, but for right now, I'm going to cut it here. So again, thank you so much for watching. It's so very humbling, the fact that so many people even enjoy sticking around as I play Kingdom Death throughout Seasons 1 and Season 2. Hopefully you enjoyed the setting, which is Kingdom Death, the very twisted, very insane, disorder-filled, very flawed heroes which you play when you play in this setting. It is one of the better settings through all of the tabletop games I've played. Even though it's not an RPG, it is a board game, but the setting is one of the greatest ones. It's one of the greatest settings I think I've played in. And it's just so very humbling that so many people wanted to stick with me as I played through. And this whole story, again, you can watch it, you can see it. It actually does happen. The story that all that I said is not embellished. That all was delivered through the game via random events. So, I'll see you in the next part of these episodes. Thank you so much.